The land holds its breath long before the heat arrives. At the edge of the dry forest where trees thin and the soil turns pale, the ground is marked by memories rather than water. Riverbeds lie open like scars, their curves still visible, their purpose long forgotten. Dust settles into the cracks where currents once moved. The air carries no moisture, only warmth that builds quietly layer by layer through the day. Morning light reveals a terrain shaped by absence. Grasses grow brittle, bending without sound. Leaves curl inward to conserve what little they can. Wind moves freely here, unobstructed by dense canopy, lifting fine sand and carrying it across open clearings. In this place, shade is temporary, and every shadow shifts quickly, offering brief relief before vanishing again. The silence is not complete. Insects continue their work, dry and persistent. Distant birds call sparingly, their voices short and measured, as if sound itself must be rationed. No flowing water interrupts the stillness. There is no reflection of sky on a surface below, no ripple to suggest life moving beneath. What remains is a landscape that once depended on rivers, but now survives on timing, memory, and restraint. Seasonal change governs everything here. During short periods of rain, channels awaken and carve fresh lines through the earth. Life gathers quickly, drawn by opportunity. But those moments pass. When the rains retreat, the land closes again, leaving behind only the faintest signs of where water once traveled. Paths that mattered weeks ago become empty routes, indistinguishable from the rest of the terrain. This environment does not announce its danger. There are no sudden storms, no dramatic collapses. Instead, risk accumulates slowly, embedded in distance and heat. Movement demands calculation. Every journey across open ground costs energy that cannot easily be replaced. Every delay increases exposure. Survival here is shaped less by confrontation than by endurance. The dry forest desert edge is a threshold neither fully barren nor reliably fertile. It supports life only for those able to read what is no longer visible. The land does not forgive mistakes, and it offers no signals when conditions shift beyond recovery. In places like this, disappearance does not arrive with noise or struggle. It arrives quietly, carried by the gradual loss of something once taken for granted. Tigers are most often associated with dense forests and permanent rivers, places where cover is deep and water is never far away. Yet along the dry forest desert edge, a different reality emerges. Here, tigers exist at the margins of what their species is known to endure, occupying territories shaped not by abundance, but by restraint. The landscape does not support excess movement or wasted effort. Every action must be measured against distance, heat, and time. Physically, the tiger remains unmistakable. Broad shoulders carry dense muscle built for short bursts of power. The forelimbs are thick and compact, capable of delivering decisive force in a single motion. Stripes break up the outline of the body, dissolving its shape against dry grasses and scattered trees just as effectively as they do in darker forests. Even in open terrain, this camouflage allows the tiger to remain unseen until the final moment. But strength alone does not define survival here. In regions where surface water disappears for months, the tiger's most important tool is not its claws or teeth, but its ability to remember. These animals do not search randomly for water. Instead, they rely on mental maps formed over years of movement routes that once led to seasonal streams, shallow pools, or shaded depressions where moisture lingered longest. These paths are reinforced through repetition, becoming invisible lines etched into behavior rather than land. Movement patterns reflect this dependence on memory. Tigers in these environments travel deliberately, often following the same corridors through the terrain. They revisit old kill sites where scavengers once exposed damp soil beneath carcasses. They pause at dry riverbeds, assessing ground that no longer offers clear signs. The absence of water does not immediately alter these routines. Habit persists long after conditions have changed. Within the ecosystem, the tiger remains a dominant predator, regulating prey populations and influencing where other animals move. Herbivores adjust their routes to avoid known tiger paths, even as water scarcity compresses them into fewer viable areas. This concentration of prey can briefly benefit the predator, creating opportunities that seem to confirm its continued control over the landscape. Yet dominance here is fragile. Territory selection becomes a high-risk calculation. Choosing to hold ground near a drying river may offer short-term advantages, but it can also trap the tiger between empty corridors with no access to water beyond its borders. Expanding outward risks, confrontation with other tigers facing the same pressure. Retreat is not always possible once distances grow too great. Unlike many animals, tigers cannot rely on frequent drinking to compensate for mistakes. Their large bodies demand consistent hydration and prolonged scarcity. Forces physiological limits to the surface. The signs appear gradually longer. Resting periods reduce travel, fewer exploratory movements. These changes do not announce failure. They simply narrow the range of options available. In this environment, the tiger's role in the ecosystem remains critical, but its position is no longer guaranteed by power alone. Survival depends on how accurately remembered routes align with a landscape that no longer behaves as it once did. Here, the strongest predator is sustained not by what it can see, but by what it believes is still there. The first threat does not arrive with confrontation. There is no rival emerging from cover, no sudden chase across open ground. Instead, it takes shape gradually embedded in the rhythm of the season. Rainfall shortens, then stops entirely. What was expected to return does not. The land enters a prolonged pause, and the tiger's established routes begin to lose their meaning. At first, the changes are subtle. A familiar stream bed remains dry longer than usual. Shallow pools that once held water beneath overhanging roots evaporate weeks earlier than expected. The ground hardens, sealing away the last traces of moisture. These shifts do not trigger immediate alarm. For a predator accustomed to scarcity, absence alone is not yet a signal of danger. The tiger continues to move along known corridors, following paths reinforced through repetition. Each route is tied to a past outcome, water-found prey encountered, shade secured. These memories guide movement more strongly than present cues. In dense forests, fresh signs constantly update behavior. Here, information arrives slowly, and change is easy to misread. As distances between reliable resources increase, the tiger must travel farther between resting points. Heat accumulates during these journeys, draining energy with each step across exposed ground. Rest periods lengthen, but recovery remains incomplete. Without water to replace what is lost, fatigue lingers beneath the surface. Other animals respond differently. Smaller herbivores shift their movement patterns first, abandoning dry corridors in favor of remaining water sources. Their absence alters the balance of the territory. Hunting opportunities become less predictable, forcing the tiger to invest more effort for the same reward. Each successful kill provides sustenance, but it does not resolve the underlying shortage. The dry riverbeds become focal points of uncertainty. These channels once served as reliable guides leading toward water during the harshest months. Now they offer only direction without destination. The tiger pauses along their edges, assessing soil that carries no scent of moisture. The land provides no confirmation that conditions have changed permanently. This is where the first real conflict emerges, not between predator and prey, but between memory and reality. The tiger's internal map insists that water should be present beyond the next rise or along a familiar bend. The environment contradicts this expectation without explanation. There is no clear boundary marking when persistence becomes risk. Territorial pressure intensifies the problem. Adjacent ranges overlap more frequently as water scarcity compresses multiple tigers into narrower zones. Signs of others appear along the margins, scent markings, tracks, brief encounters avoided rather than challenged. Expansion promises access to potential resources, but increases the likelihood of confrontation. Remaining within established boundaries reduces conflict, but deepens isolation. The tiger's response is cautious adjustment rather than immediate change. Movement becomes more conservative. Paths are reused even when results diminish. Exploration slows, limited to short deviations from known routes. This behavior reduces exposure, but also limits discovery. In a landscape that no longer supports old assumptions, caution can quietly become a liability. The threat remains invisible because it lacks a single moment of escalation. There is no injury to signal danger, no dramatic failure that forces retreat. Instead, options narrow one by one. Routes that once connected vital points now end in absence. Distances that were manageable begin to exceed safe limits. Physiological stress follows environmental constraint. Dehydration does not manifest suddenly. It alters judgment, reducing tolerance for exertion and increasing dependence on routine. The tiger rests more frequently, waiting for conditions to shift back into alignment with expectation. But the season offers no correction. This is the first stage of true vulnerability. The tiger is still capable, still dominant within its territory. Yet it operates on assumptions that no longer hold. The landscape has changed quietly, without markers or warning. What was once a reliable system now leads the predator deeper into a pattern that no longer supports survival. Here the conflict is not fought with force. It unfolds through delay, repetition, and misplaced confidence. The danger lies not in what the tiger confronts, but in what it continues to trust paths that once led to life and now lead only farther into uncertainty. The buildup begins long before movement breaks the stillness. Heat presses down on the open ground, flattening scent and dulling sound. The tiger lowers its body as it enters a stretch of sparse cover where grasses offer little concealment and trees stand too far apart to provide continuous shade. Every step is deliberate. Energy cannot be wasted here. Ahead, a small group of ungulates moves cautiously across the clearing. Their formation is loose, their attention divided between the open terrain and the tree line behind them. They are drawn by what remains patches of forage that still hold minimal moisture beneath the surface. For the tiger, this moment represents opportunity and risk in equal measure. A successful hunt promises calories that may sustain it for days. A failed attempt costs more than hunger. It costs water lost through exertion. The tiger waits motionless, allowing the distance to close without revealing its position. Muscles tense beneath the striped coat, storing power for a burst that must be brief and decisive. In this environment, there is no margin for prolonged pursuit. Speed alone will not secure success. Timing must compensate for the lack of cover. When the tiger commits, the ground erupts. Dust lifts into the air as the predator surges forward, covering open space with explosive force. Hooves scatter in every direction. The herd fractures, each animal choosing its own escape path. The tiger focuses on a single target, adjusting its angle to intercept rather than chase directly. Every stride drains reserves that cannot be quickly restored. The distance closes, then widens again as the prey veers toward uneven terrain. The tiger adapts, shifting direction to avoid obstacles that could slow its advance. Heat builds rapidly in the lungs. The chase cannot last long. Within seconds, the outcome must be decided. The prey stumbles briefly, just enough to suggest vulnerability. The tiger lunges, extending its reach in a final effort to end the pursuit. But the ground betrays the predator. Loose soil collapses beneath its weight, stealing momentum at the critical moment. The prey regains balance and escapes into a zone too open for concealment, where the tiger must abandon the attempt. The chase ends abruptly. Silence returns, broken only by heavy breathing and the settling of dust. The tiger stands still, chest rising and falling, heat radiating from its body. There is no injury, no dramatic wound. Yet the cost is immediate. Exertion accelerates dehydration, pulling moisture from muscle and blood with every breath. The tiger retreats towards shade, seeking relief beneath the sparse canopy. Recovery here is incomplete. Without water cooling relies on rest alone. Time stretches as the predator lies motionless, conserving what remains. The failure is not catastrophic, but it narrows the margin further. As the day progresses, the consequences ripple outward. The herd, now alert, shifts its movement away from known tiger paths. Prey becomes less accessible, increasing the distance between viable hunting opportunities. Each additional kilometer traveled compounds the strain already placed on the tiger's body. Later, another encounter unfolds near a dry riverbed. The terrain offers narrow channels and exposed banks, remnants of flows that once guided life through the region. A lone animal moves cautiously along the edge, drawn by cooler ground where water once lingered. The tiger positions itself downwind, using the contours of the channel to mask its approach. This time the attack is shorter. The tiger closes the distance quickly, forcing the prey into a desperate turn. The struggle is brief and decisive. The predator succeeds securing a kill with minimal pursuit. For a moment, control is restored. The tiger feeds, reclaiming energy lost earlier in the day. But even success carries limits. Flesh provides sustenance, yet it cannot replace the water lost through exertion and heat. Feeding occurs in stages interrupted by long pauses as the tiger rests beside the carcass. The process stretches into the evening, extending exposure rather than resolving it. Scavengers gather at a distance, drawn by scent and opportunity. Their presence adds pressure, shortening the time the tiger can remain. When feeding ends, remnants are abandoned markers of a momentary victory that offers no lasting solution. As night falls, temperatures drop slightly, granting temporary relief. The tiger moves again, following familiar routes toward places where water should exist. The day's events reinforce reliance on memory rather than adaptation. Success and failure alike point backward toward patterns that once worked. This sequence marks the first true peak of tension. Action has unfolded, choices have been tested, and outcomes have been mixed. The tiger remains alive, capable, and dominant within moments of contact. Yet the environment has exposed a deeper imbalance. Hunting alone cannot compensate for what the land no longer provides. Here the struggle is not defined by defeat in combat. It is shaped by the realization that even perfect execution does not guarantee stability. Each chase, each kill, each retreat into shade carries an unseen cost. The predator moves forward unaware that the system supporting these actions is already eroding beneath its feet, beyond moments of pursuit and confrontation. Survival in this environment is defined by what happens during long intervals of restraint. For tigers living along the dry forest desert edge, daily life is shaped less by dramatic encounters than by careful conservation of energy. Movement is reduced to what is necessary. Rest becomes a primary strategy, not a response to fatigue, but a means of survival. Reproductive cycles do not pause for environmental hardship. Mating still occurs within narrow, seasonal windows, guided by instinct rather than external conditions. But the success of reproduction here depends on precise timing. Females must secure territories that offer not only prey, but sufficient cover and minimal travel distance between resting sites. In a landscape where water is unreliable, even short journeys become significant risks. When cubs are born, they enter an environment that offers little margin for error. Dens are chosen with extreme care, often in shaded depressions, rocky outcrops, or thick clusters of vegetation where temperature remains more stable throughout the day. These locations provide concealment, but they do not guarantee access to water. Protection relies on isolation rather than abundance. The early weeks of a cub's life are marked by stillness. Mothers limit movement, reducing exposure and conserving moisture. Nursing demands additional resources, increasing physiological stress. Each decision to leave the den carries weight. Hunting trips must be short, efficient, and calculated to avoid unnecessary exertion. Cubs grow slowly in these conditions. Their development is shaped by scarcity, learning restraint before speed or strength. Exploration remains limited, confined to shaded areas near the den. The absence of water alters behavior from the beginning, instilling patterns of caution that differ from those seen in more resource-rich habitats. As cubs mature, the challenges intensify. Training them to follow requires gradual expansion of movement ranges. Short excursions introduce them to familiar paths, routes their mother has memorized over years. These paths are not random. They reflect accumulated experience, linking past success to present necessity. Cubs learn the terrain through repetition, not discovery. Yet the environment continues to change beneath these learned patterns. Water sources that once supported previous generations no longer behave predictably. Teaching cubs to rely on remembered routes becomes increasingly risky. What was once a dependable lesson may now lead them into dead ends. Feeding young amplifies the cost of hunting. Larger prey is required, increasing the energy invested in each attempt. Success must compensate not only for the adult's needs, but for the demands of growing offspring. Failed hunts accumulate consequences more quickly, narrowing recovery time between attempts. Mortality rates rise quietly. Not through sudden loss, but through gradual weakening. Cubs may survive initial scarcity, only to struggle during prolonged dry periods, when the distances between resources expand beyond safe limits. Some disappear during training excursions, leaving no trace beyond interrupted paths and abandoned resting sites. Adult tigers face parallel pressures. Territorial maintenance becomes more complex as competition intensifies around remaining viable zones. Scent marking decreases as energy conservation takes priority. Defensive behavior shifts from confrontation to avoidance, reducing risk but surrendering ground over time. This adaptation preserves life in the short term but reshapes population dynamics. Territories grow fragmented. Genetic exchange becomes less frequent as individuals retreat into isolated pockets. The landscape supports fewer tigers, each occupying a larger, less stable range. Despite these constraints, the species persists, not through dominance, but through adjustment. Life continues in cycles compressed by limitation. Births occur, cubs grow, and territories change hands without spectacle. The process lacks the visible drama of hunts or fights, yet it determines survival more decisively than any single encounter. In this environment, existence is sustained by balance rather than triumph. Every stage of life, birth, growth, reproduction, decline, is influenced by access to what cannot always be found. Water shapes behavior, even when it is absent, guiding decisions through memory rather than presence. This quiet struggle defines the core of survival here. It is not marked by noise or sudden collapse. It unfolds slowly, embedded in daily routines that grow increasingly constrained. The tiger remains a symbol of strength, yet its continued presence depends on a fragile alignment between inherited behavior and a landscape that no longer guarantees the resources it once did. The greatest challenge does not announce itself as a single event. It unfolds as a convergence of pressures that compress time, space, and choice. As the dry season deepens, the remaining sources of water become fewer and more predictable. What once required memory now demands competition. The landscape narrows, and with it the margin for survival. Water holes that persist beyond the early months draw life from across the region. Paths converge toward these points etched into the ground by repeated passage. For prey, these sites offer relief and risk in equal measure. For predators, they become arenas where opportunity and danger overlap. The tiger approaches such places with caution, aware that they attract not only prey, but rivals. Territorial boundaries dissolve under necessity. Scent marks fade in the heat, replaced by overlapping tracks that signal increasing proximity among individuals. Encounters that might once have been avoided become unavoidable. The tiger reads these signs carefully, adjusting movement to minimize confrontation. Direct conflict promises injury, an outcome that cannot be sustained when recovery depends on hydration that may no longer exist. As pressure mounts, behavior shifts. The tiger alters its schedule, favoring movement during cooler hours to reduce water loss. Daytime activity diminishes. Night travel increases, guided by memory rather than visibility. These adaptations reduce immediate stress, but introduce new uncertainties. Familiar landmarks appear different in darkness. Distances feel longer when navigation relies on recall rather than sight. The environment compounds these challenges. Extended drought hardens the soil, erasing scent trails and dulling auditory cues. Wind redistributes sand across known routes, masking subtle depressions that once held moisture. Even the tiger's mental map begins to lose alignment with the terrain it describes. At the same time, prey behavior grows increasingly erratic. Herbivores abandon traditional grazing patterns, clustering tightly around remaining water sources. Competition intensifies within these groups, raising alertness and reducing vulnerability. The tiger's opportunities become concentrated but heavily guarded. Each attempt requires precise timing and minimal exertion. When an opportunity arises, it carries elevated stakes. A failed hunt near a water source does more than waste energy, it signals presence to other predators. The tiger must weigh the benefit of persistence against the risk of exposure. Waiting conserves energy, but allows rivals to claim advantage. Acting risks depletion that cannot be easily reversed. The decisive moment arrives without spectacle. Drawn by necessity, the tiger commits to a route that leads beyond its established territory. This expansion is not driven by aggression, but by calculation. The alternative is stagnation within an area no longer capable of sustaining life. The choice is subtle, yet irreversible. Crossing into contested ground increases tension immediately. Signs of another tiger appear with frequency, fresh tracks. Recent scent marks disturbed vegetation. The tiger adjusts its path to avoid direct encounter, but avoidance consumes distance. Each detour extends travel time, increasing exposure to heat and dehydration. At a shrinking water source, the tiger pauses. The ground bears evidence of recent use prints layered over prints, the scent of multiple species compressed into a narrow margin. Drinking offers temporary relief, but it also anchors the tiger to a location that invites conflict. Remaining too long risks confrontation. Leaving too soon forfeits the benefit. Nearby, another predator arrives. The encounter is brief and silent, marked by tension rather than action. Neither animal advances. Posture and distance communicate intent. The standoff resolves without violence, but the message is clear. This territory cannot support both. From this point, the landscape offers fewer options. Retreat means retracing routes that now exceed safe distances without water. Advancement leads deeper into unfamiliar ground, where memory provides little guidance. The tiger moves forward not out of confidence, but because the alternative has quietly disappeared. Physical limits surface with increasing clarity. Dehydration reduces endurance, dulls reaction time, and alters decision-making. Rest periods lengthen, but recovery remains partial. The tiger's movements become conservative, favoring shaded corridors and minimal elevation change. Exploration slows to near cessation. As days pass, signs of presence thin. Prey becomes scarce. Hunting opportunities arise less frequently, and success rates decline. Each failure compounds the cost of persistence. The tiger's body responds by prioritizing conservation over pursuit. Weight loss becomes visible, though not immediately debilitating. The environment offers no intervention. There are no sudden rains, no unexpected relief. The season holds steady, indifferent to the tiger's condition. Routes that once connected critical resources now terminate in absence. The tiger follows them regardless, driven by habit reinforced over years. At some point, movement patterns break. The tiger ceases to patrol large sections of its former range. Scent marking diminishes further, replaced by isolated resting sites where the animal conserves what remains. These locations are chosen for shade and shelter, not proximity to water. Eventually, the tiger's presence fades from the landscape. There is no defining moment, no evidence of struggle. Tracks stop appearing along familiar paths. Prey resumes cautious movement through areas once avoided. Other tigers test the boundaries of the abandoned territory, probing for resistance that never comes. The disappearance leaves no clear explanation. There is no carcass to mark failure, no signs of conflict to assign blame. The land absorbs the absence, quietly reshaping itself around new patterns of movement. What remains are incomplete routes, paths that once led somewhere now ending without purpose. This is the final conflict, and it offers no resolution in the traditional sense. The tiger is not defeated by another animal, nor overcome by a single catastrophic event. Instead, it is eroded by the gradual misalignment between behavior and environment. Memory, once a strength, becomes a constraint. The ecosystem adjusts without pause. Life continues to orbit the remaining water sources. New territories form, shaped by altered conditions. The role once filled by the absent predator will be taken by others or reduced entirely. Balance shifts, not through collapse, but through quiet redistribution. In this environment, survival is not guaranteed by power, experience, or dominance. It depends on the ability to adapt memory itself to recognize when the map no longer matches the land. The tiger's disappearance is not a failure of strength, but a consequence of persistence in a world that no longer supports the paths it once remembered. The landscape returns to stillness without ceremony. Light shifts across the dry forest desert edge, revealing the same contours that defined the beginning. Open ground, sparse trees, and channels carved by water that no longer flows. Nothing in the terrain marks what has changed. The absence is absorbed, folded into the rhythm of the place, as if it had always been part of the design. Season follows season with measured indifference. Heat gives way to cooler nights, then returns again. Occasional rains arrive and fade briefly, restoring familiar lines before retreating once more. The land does not remember individuals. It responds only to patterns, pressure, movement, and availability. Where one presence fades, others adjust, filling space or abandoning it entirely. The tiger's role within this system does not end with disappearance. Its influence lingers in altered routes taken by prey in territories reshaped by absence in the redistribution of life around remaining resources. The ecosystem recalibrates quietly, guided by forces that operate beyond visibility. Balance is not restored to what it was, but reorganized into what can persist. This cycle defines survival here. Strength initiates action, but endurance sustains it. Memory guides movement, yet it must remain flexible to remain useful. When conditions change beyond recognition, persistence alone becomes insufficient. The environment rewards those able to release outdated patterns as readily as it once rewarded those who followed them. There is no judgment in this process, no victory, no defeat. Only continuity shaped by constraint. Predators rise and fall not through singular events, but through prolonged alignment or misalignment with the systems that support them. In places where water exists only intermittently, life depends on reading what is no longer present as accurately as what remains. The dry forest desert edge continues to exist as a threshold. It supports life without excess, allowing survival only within narrow margins. Those margins shift slowly, often imperceptibly, until they no longer coincide with inherited behavior. When that happens, disappearance becomes part of the cycle rather than an exception. In this environment, survival is not defined by conquest or control. It is defined by adjustment over time. The land endures by changing. Life endures by following when it can. What remains is a quiet truth shaped by heat distance and absence in a world governed by scarcity. Even the strongest presence can fade without resistance, Lee.